Welcome to My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson, a journey into the deepest teachings of Torah and their application to our personal, emotional, and psychological lives.
A good tevach, a good week. We continue our journey in the life-changing Sefer HaTanya. This program is made possible by Rena Lights LLC and it is dedicated by Judith Kirk in loving memory of her wonderful father, David Eliyahu ben Avram Yitzchak. So we began learning Perek Yud Aleph, the 11th chapter of Tanya, which in the fantastic and amazing structure of Tanya, everything is so organized. Just to sum up, that after chapter 1, or the first half of chapter 1, the Alter Rebbe lays out the questions about the 5 levels of tzaddik, Beini and Rasha, 2 levels of tzaddik, tzaddik gomer, tzaddik she'ena gomer, tzaddik v'tevle, tzaddik v'rale, and Rasha v'tevle, v'rasha v'rale, and middle the Beinini begins to explain the 2 souls, the divine soul and the animal soul, in reverse order, starting with the animal soul. And in chapter 2, 3, 4, and 5 is all about the divine soul. The divine soul, its faculties, its garments. 6, 7, and 8 is about the animal soul, the soul itself, the anatomy of that soul, and its faculties and garments. In chapter 9, it comes together, the battle that they encounter each other, the battle over the small city, Guf. And in chapter 10, he begins to say how that battle, where do we stand? What's the state of the union, state of the battle? Meaning, who is dominating? Which king? Is it the divine soul or the animal soul? So chapter Yud, Perek Yud, chapter 10 talks about the tzaddik and the 2 levels of the tzaddik, with the ultimate being the tzaddik gomer that is utterly, completely defined by godliness and the godly purpose of existence. So now in chapter 11 is the other end of the spectrum. What happens when the animal soul is dominating? So the animal soul dominates, that already puts the person in the category of a Rasha. In Rasha itself, there's a Rasha v'tevle, which means he has good, because we have a divine soul as well. However, the animal soul has some impact on him. The question is the level of impact. Just as he spoke in chapter 10, there's the 2 levels, general levels of impact, where that tzaddik gomer is completely transformed the animal soul, everything is divine. Tzaddik she'ena gomer means there's still some trace, not actuality, but some potential, because it's not totally been transformed, because there isn't the utter and absolute love for the divine, so there's still room in the context of a city. The city has been conquered, but there's still room for something that could ultimately be resistance, even though it's in actuality not. So now in chapter 11, the discussion is, which really is much more the levels that where we're at, where the animal soul is in effect. It's not owning the city, but it's affecting the city. The question is to what extent. So just like with that tzaddik virale or tzaddik she'ena gomer, there are tens of thousands of levels, as we explained in chapter 10. The same thing with the Rasha v'tevle. And how is it determined? By the kamos and echos, the quantity and quality of the animal soul's control or dominance or impact on the person. Now what's important to keep emphasizing, and I emphasized it many times, when you read it, ostensibly it seems like it's all these details actually dissecting every possible level. But think of it this way. A mother who's cleaning her child. So you don't say, I'll just clean the child in general. Every nail, every fiber, every detail of the child, the mother wants to be clean, or you want to have a clean home. It's not just in general. Someone that's very meticulous makes sure that everything is perfect. Same thing in health. A good doctor is going to make sure that you're as perfect as possible. The Alter Rebbe is the ultimate soul doctor, a Rebbe. As he explains in the introduction to Tanya, soul connections that he had with his chassidim, and Tanya, he's documenting it all as a guidebook of how we can live up to our greatest potential. So therefore, it's not just in general, you're a good person, not just a good person, as the animal soul, the divine soul, every detail matters. And as we see in chapter 11, in the most detailed fashion, how the Alter Rebbe dissects every possible scenario. And he begins on the highest level, as soon as you have an animal soul that has some impact on the person, it's already no longer a tzaddik. We'll learn about a Beini in the next chapter. It's no longer a tzaddik. Because there's the good of the divine soul is there, but it's kafuf u'batel, which means in some way it still has to give in to the animal soul, even if it's minuscule. So in the context of the example of a city, yes, the divine soul, let's say, is dominating. But since the animal soul is still active, no matter what level, so somewhere you can't say that the divine soul is totally in control. And Alter Rebbe spelled out, let's sum up what he spelled out. He spoke first about the measurement, whether it's Meschale, Gamken, Revovas, Madregas, Chalukas, the Rosh V'Tevle, B'inyan Kamas V'Echus HaBitl, the quantity and qualitative Bitl and Kfifus HaTev Ra, the subjugation and the nullification of the good to the Ra, when the Ra has impact. Now, when does this Ra, which means the animal soul's self-interests, have impact? So this is where the Alter Rebbe spelled out the minimal, and then from there we're going to go to higher levels, meaning more dominance, more control of the animal soul. That's what I mean by higher. So what did he say? Let's read inside. Yeshmi, there's a person, shakfifa v'abitletzle, that the good, which is suppressed and subjugated to the animal soul, is on a minuscule extent. Ma'at mizer, which means very small. Ma'at means diminished, and mizer, from the word zoyer, means very small, minuscule. But there's something there. So you can't say that the total control of the city, in this case of the human being, is controlled by the divine soul. Because even if 1 second, in a minute way, that animal soul, the other king, has a say, you haven't fully conquered it. So it's on a minuscule level, okay? We have gamzeis, and even then, on the minuscule level, eine b'matmidus, as we discussed, it's not permanent. Or it's not even common at frequent intervals, and we discussed what the difference between that was. Tmidus means not continuous, and even Todir can mean it's not continuous, perpetual, but it's consistent, meaning every day or every few days. Even that it's not. In other words, it's not a pattern, but it still affects. Elo li'itim rechekim. Only on rare occasions, Mizgaber Arala Tev v'kevish eriktano. So think of it this way: the divine soul is the main controlling force in this city, but the enemy has not been vanquished. So from time to time, it rears its head, and when it does, even if it's at infrequent intervals, rare intervals, like he says, itim rechekim, infrequent intervals, nevertheless, it is kevish sa'ir. Aktana hu aguf, which is the body. However, and we already have all the qualifications. Firstly, it's only minuscule. It's only a small type of effect. Secondly, it's not continuous. Thirdly, it's not consistent, meaning in any pattern or every routine. It's only at frequent intervals. And even then, he continues, achle kule. And even then, it's not complete. In other words, the animal soul is not controlling and conquering all of the body. So in other words, it's popping its head in the city, but not the entire city. Because you could have, it's not consistent, it's not continuous, it's only small, but when it does affect, it affects the entire city. No, it doesn't affect the entire human being. Only part of it. Now, what does it affect? It has its so-called loyalists. That part, which will obey its interests, the animal soul's interest. So when you think of it this way, you see this is almost like the most minimum level of Rosh V'Tevle. But it's still a Rosh V'Tevle because, again, we're looking for perfection here. We're looking for total purity. And even if one smidgen, one little corner of the baby has not been cleaned, there's a little dirt. It may be outnumbered and overshadowed by all the beauty and purity, but that's enough to already categorize this person as a Rosh V'Tevle, and we want to have a perfect relationship, a seamless one, total health. We don't want to just say 99% or 99.9%. So here are all the scenarios all the way to the point. So it's not complete, it's only part, and now he's going to expel out. And what happens to that part? Even if it's one person, let's say, just to go back to the example, that the city is controlled by the divine soul, but the animal soul still has some say, not over the entire city, and also it's definitely not consistently, and as we discussed, it's only minuscule, but the part that it does control, it causes that person, let's say it's one person in the city that still listens to the enemy, to the animal soul. Not just listens, but that part of the person becomes a merkava, a vehicle, and a garment. So it's not just passing through, it becomes a vehicle and a garment. This loyalist to the animal soul is a vehicle and a garment to the selfish interests of the animal soul, even though we said it's minuscule and only over one part of the person. And this becomes to become dressed in one of the three garments that we discussed earlier: thought, speech, and action. And now he's going to spell out what that means. In other words, it's not affecting necessarily all three: the action of the person, the behavior of the person, and their speech and their thought. Even if it's one of them, but that one, and in that moment, it's a garment and a vehicle for the animal soul's interests. Now you have to find a person that has that is so rare, but that already categorizes the person as a Rosha, in this case a Rosha V'Tevle. So now let's continue learning. He's going to now talk about the effect. What is it affecting the person? He's going to give real-time examples, real-life examples. He continues. And bear in mind again that this is not permanent, it's only temporary. But while it's there, it's controlling. So that individual in the city is listening to the animal soul, even though he's outnumbered and the rest of the city is all listening to the divine soul. Meaning, in the case, in the nimshal, in the moral, that all the faculties, other faculties are listening to the divine soul, but there's one that's not. And for that temporary moment, that's what defines him as a Rosh V'Tevle. So now he's going to continue to explain. So we say, B'shleish l'v'sheh hanal. And he's going to go through each one of the garments, starting from the last of the three garments. Action, maisa, remember, dibur, speech, and machshava, the only three ways that we can express ourselves. Faculties, we have 10 faculties. We have chabad, chagas, nihim. We have the intellect, the cognitive faculties, the emotional ones. But expressions, because you could have faculties and they're not necessarily being expressed, can express itself in thought, speech, and action. So the Alter Rebbe continues. Oy b'maisa levad. The hainu. I should add, he has the word levusha. Now the hainu. This means. Number one, that affects him. Oy b'maisa levad. Or only in action, in the realm of action alone. Lases avedis kalis, to transgress and carry out some minor transgressions. Avedis kalis. Remember, we're speaking here on the minimalistic level, the least. Now, this could be, you could easily say, even if it's not permanent, it's only temporary and affects only maisa, but it could be aveda chamura. But remember, the Alter Rebbe is starting from the most subtle form, the most least amount of impact of the animal soul, And from there we can extrapolate levels, like he said, tens of thousands of levels. So he's using an example, which is often the case. You use an example of extremes. What's the lowest, the minimal amount, what we would call a person a Rosh V'Tevle? So as soon as he has anything of the animal soul controlling him, even if it's on the most smallest scale, so now it's only action, and that too, Avedis Kalis, minor sins, minor Avedis. In some places in Chassidus explains the word Aveda, it's like the antithesis of mitzvah. Mitzvah comes from tzavsa v'chibur, a connection. Aveda comes from havorim reshus l'reshus. Aveda means a disconnection, a displacement. If a mitzvah is aligning things, an Aveda disaligns it. What does that mean? For example, if you say the person has a dislocated shoulder, or has something else, God forbid, it's not aligned, which creates something that's unhealthy on a physical level. The same thing spiritually. When a person's human body, this small city, his body, his limbs, his organs, everything is aligned with what God created it for, which is all the shamash eskening to serve the God. Everything God created was only for his kavod, so it's aligned. That's a mitzvah. An Aveda displaces, disconnects. That what you're doing is not aligned with the operator manual, with the Torah that's guiding you how to use your body and being. So, but in this case, we're talking about Avedis Kalis. V'loy chamuris chas v'shalom. And not major ones, or not harsh ones, God forbid. Because again, we're speaking on the lowest end of the spectrum, the minimal that will define someone as a Rasha, because an animal soul is active. But practically, it is on this minimalistic level, on this minimal level. That's Maisa. Now comes the next Oi, or B'dibur Levad. In the realm of speech alone, only speech. It's not affecting his action. An action, as we know, on one hand, you could say it's not a major thing because it's only a superficial act. You're not talking about it, you're not thinking about it, it's not coming with feelings. It could be something almost robotic, but it's still a sin. It's still something you shouldn't be doing. So you could talk about Maisa as being something that is like someone just does it by habit even. It's dry and not with any deeper part. On the other hand, action is also substantial. When you do something in action, if you speak about it and you think about it, we're going to soon learn it has also its severity, its corrupt and polluting elements. So there's something in each one of the three garments that the other doesn't have, a leniency and a strength. When I say leniency, like action could be an empty act, but on the other hand, it's a real act. Speech, on the other hand, you could say speech is not as substantial as action. You didn't do something. Let's say you spoke negatively about someone. That's not really a good example because he's speaking here again on a minimal level. But you could say speaking, even though Lashon Hara, it says kills a person, but it's still not actual murder. It's not an action. So on that hand, you could say dibur is not as intense as Maisa. Or you could say, on the other hand, it's more because you're involved in it, you're consumed. It's not just a superficial and external behavioral thing. So in the realm of speech alone, and he gives, and here, just like he gave in action, he said Avedis Kalis, lenient Avedis, not meaning things that are minor transgressions. So here he's saying, the dibur levad, the daber avak, lashon hara, v'litzonus. Ukahai gavna. That he's speaking borderline. Avak means literally dust. But in Halach and Torah and Chazal, it talks about avak meaning the dust of something means it's not the thing itself, it's only its outer dust. It's like dust is gathered. So we call it not, it's avak lashon hara. Borderline slander or borderline litzonus, mockery, ukai gavna, etc. Other things like that. Again, why is he bringing this? Why isn't he speaking a more severe case? Because he's speaking on the lowest end of the spectrum. But there's something has happened. The dibur, the person has spoken borderline. Halacha talks about what's the difference between avak, borderline, actual lashon hara. But bottom line, it's not as severe as actual, obviously, but it's still dust. The Rebbe once wrote in a Sikha, in a footnote, that dust is, Rosh Hashanah is do sitra achra. Sitra achra, as we learned earlier, the other side. It's not the dusha. So even if one can get away, so-called, like when you say a white lie, borderline, you can get away and say, I didn't really speak Lashon Hara, but between us, it was on the borderline. And the same thing with Litzonis, because Avak, even though he says it, doesn't repeat it, but most likely Avak goes on Lashon Hara and Litzonis, on both forms. Because if not, it wouldn't make sense. Litzonis is not a small matter. So just like it's the dust or the borderline, Lashon Hara is borderline Litzonis, mockery. Yeah. And Kahai Gavin, etc. And then comes the third or. Oi! Remember the third garment. So here's another scenario. And he keeps using oi. He's not saying in all three. A person can, God forbid, all three garments can be the animal soul can control, where their actions and our speech and our thoughts are inappropriate or improper. But that would mean that the Nefesh Habamis is controlling more than just a more small corner of the city. It's controlling the whole thought, speech, and action. Or at least that we know it's not, it's temporary, like he said here. It's only infrequent. But still, even in that infrequent moment, it's controlling a lot. But here he wants to say it's only controlling, like we said, Be'echad mishlei shelevusheh hanal. Biktsose levad, only part of the person, one of the three garments. So now what's the third scenario? Oy b'machshava levad. It keeps with the word levad, again to demonstrate that it's only thought. Now, is thought worse than speech and action or harsher than speech and action? So on one hand, you could say a person thinks about something. We know halachically, thinking negatively is not a good thing. But speaking negatively and acting negatively is much stronger, it's much more substantial. On the other hand, machshava has something that dibur and ma'aseh doesn't have. It's more intimate. When you think about something, it pollutes you more. It may not have an impact directly on another, even though everything has an impact, but it's not quite like an action. If you think of, God forbid, stealing from someone or hurting someone, it's not the same thing as actually hurting them. But still, the fact that you think about it from your end, it pollutes the person more, and the gavra. So in the cheftzeh, ma'aseh is more severe, stronger, and dibur, less than ma'aseh, but more than machshava. Machshava is just within yourself. But from the person's perspective, when you think about something, it consumes you. And now that's what he brings. Machshava levad, the realm of thought alone. And we know that thoughts, hiruri aveda, hakoshim aveda. Thoughts come of a sin, and here we're talking about a sin in the area of sexuality, is worse than sinning itself. The Talmud in Yuma says that. The Gemara in Yuma, Chavtes Aleph 29a. So we have both sides of it, and that's why he's called a Rasha. You could say it's just a thought. Nevertheless, a thought is a pollutant. It polluted you. And in some ways, it's koshem avera. Why? Is it koshem? Because you're consumed with it. You're thinking about it. And in general, whenever something is affecting more the intimate, internal part of a person, it's more polluting. I said earlier, for example, sometimes out of habit, someone does something negative. We're not condoning it, but in a way, it wasn't premeditated. But if it's premeditated, it means you gave it thought. It means that your soul, your inner self, has thought about it. And you planned it. You thought about it. You were consumed with it. So that has a pagam. That causes a wound, like a pollution that in certain ways is deeper. The example Mittler Rebbe gives in a mimer for this, the difference between, let's say, you create a stain on a plain garment and a stain on a silk garment, on a precious garment. We see, if a stain goes on a garment that was something we use casually or on mundane matters, okay, it's also a stain. But if it's a stain on a very special garment that you wear, only to special occasions, holidays, Shabbos, that stain jumps out and stands out a lot more. Okay. The Maral actually says in the Siva Salem, when he talks about why is Hirhuri Aveda thoughts of sin worse than sin itself, Shemachshava is sichlis, because machshava is with the mind. And haseichel kosher yesem megufa ma'isa. And when the mind is involved, it's more harsh and more polluting than the actual action itself. Because the action is a ma'isa chumri. And it doesn't affect the person quite in such a subtle and inner place. It's like if you have bacteria enters the inner internal organs, it's much more destructive than if you get a piece of dust on your finger. A piece of dust on your eyeball is going to be much more irritating. So that's the side that machshava has that ma'isa doesn't have, and even dibur doesn't have it quite as much. But again, each one has something that the other doesn't have. So now we have the third case. We talked about the animal soul is only controlling, only part of the person, only one of the garments, and also in lenient things, and he's going to explain. So just like by ma'isa he said lenient, or he spoke about minor transgressions, and in dibur he spoke about the dust, borderline negative speech, the same thing is with machshava. That we're talking about thoughts, and there are many levels. You could have very negative thoughts, and you could have thoughts that doesn't use the word borderline. He says, "V'gam im eina mahara ba'aveda la'seisa." The truth is, he just brings a hirui aveda kosher ma'aveda. He doesn't bring any example. But then he says, "V'gam im eina mahara ba'aveda la'seisa." So you could have a thought that's setting you up. You're thinking about actually doing something, but sometimes there are thoughts, negative thoughts that are you're not going to act on it. You're just having a negative thought. You're having a machshava zara. So he's not thinking, person is not contemplating of committing, but he's just thinking about something inappropriate. And he gives an example. He's not actually thinking of a sexual sin, but merely fantasizing about an intimate relationship between a male and female. So even though it's not action-based, the thought, we're not even talking about acting, we're not even thinking about acting, but the thought itself is a pollutant. He's transgressed and guilty of violating a Torah prohibition, which says, guard yourself from every evil thing. This is in Dvarim, Chav Gimel Yud, 23:10. Shelo Yahar B'Yem, says the Gemara in Ksubis 46a, Mem Vav Aleph, do not dwell on these type of negative thoughts during the day, because it will lead you to different things. But the Alter Rebbe doesn't bring what it leads you to, because the main thing is you're not thinking about leading you to something. The thought itself is a polluting element. And that's enough to render this person a tarasha v'tevli, even if it's only even such a lenient thought. Then he's going to give more examples, or another example about this, but due to limits in time, we're going to stop here. But Misayim b'teiv. And what's the teiv? This is all telling us what's expected of us, that we're capable of controlling ourselves. You could read this and say, "Oh, who's not going to be guilty of this?" No, but it means that we have an expectation, because you have control over it, as we'll be learning in the continuation of Tanya. So we'll stop here, and we'll continue next week. Everyone have a very good week. TanyaApplied.com is where you can find this and all the previous programs, as well as submit any question.
This has been My Life, Tanya Applied with Rabbi Simon Jacobson. Please join us again next week. Visit ChasidusApplied.com for archived classes and more resources.